Merlin 3D, building the three-dimensional PSIRT animated security report, adding our objects. Okay, so now that we have an array of arrays, and we've been building up to this point, and you've seen the skull, and you've seen the JSON, now you've seen the post Jinja 2 templated JSON, an array of arrays. We're now ready to move into the world of Blender. And let's start placing our skulls and placing some text and building this 3D PSIRT security report. So again, I'm going to go full screen here today without my little head chatting. And right now, I'm going to just show you the Blender space. So we have our world here, and these different buttons. Let me go into this world. This is rendered, not rendered. We can turn off the grids and outlines. And right now we have a Python file called psirt_blender_py and an empty collection. I've deleted all the default objects. And now what we're going to do is the first thing we want to do is make a script. Well, we can make the script, but let's go ahead and just add the skull first. All right, so what I'm going to do is say File, and I'm going to import from an object. And I found this skull object on the internet, and it's gorgeous, and it's free, and it's centered and rendered nicely for us. So let's just go ahead and first make sure that the origin is in the center of the skull. So when we rotate it, it rotates and moves and scales from that center point. Now, when you render this, it's dark because there's no lighting, and we could change the color and everything. But for now, I just want to make that highlight point. So we're not going to use this object, but we are going to name it. So we're just going to call this skull, and we're going to hide it. We don't need it right now. So the first thing we need to do is make a new node tree. And then in our node tree, take this always execution off, because it will always be executing. It's very CPU intensive. Could crash your system. And we also only want to change it when different things like our tree or frame or properties change. We can also click this button at any time to execute the node tree. So first we need a script, and I'm going to use the, you can use Shift-A in here to add things. Let me just kill my WebEx because it's a noisy channel. So Shift-A to add something. And or what we can do is Control-A to search, and we want a script. And we're going to place it and zoom in. And let's just give it a name, PSIRT script, to identify it uniquely. And we're going to link it here to our PSIRT Blender. But what we need is to create a new output from this script. And what do we want the output to be? Well, we want it to be this PSIRT variable. And what is the PSIRT variable? Well, it's a generic list. And the key here is to call this PSIRT. You might even be better off copying PSIRT here and pasting it here so that they match. Okay, so that's our script link between the world of Python and the world of the Blender animation nodes. Now we're going to press W and create an invoke node. We need to invoke this. And you can see this invoke node has the output of PSIRT here that we can now work with. All right, everybody following along so far? So what we need to do is make an object instantiator. I'd like to instantiate objects of that skull. So let's take a look at how that's done. So now we can link our skull here to the world of our output. So what we need next is a Shift-A object instancer, which makes sense, right? And we're going to turn on full copy and deep copy. But before we do that, before we make copies, because it's going to be copies of this base image. So first, let's just turn on a couple of little things inside of the object's material properties. So I don't want to change the color. That doesn't really work. I'm going to light it with lighting to color it. But I do want it to be, let's try metallic of 5. And now I need to turn on the render here. And I do need some basic lighting to see what this is going to look like. Now I'm not going to keep this light in here permanently, but let's just put a sun on to give us a sense, wow. So again, that's from the metallic. And if I take metallic to 0, that's our base image. Let's just see 1 versus, let's say, 25. See, there is no more strength in the metallic. Just a 1 here is fine. And we have this nice shiny metallic space. Well, I also am going to add a clear coat of 1 to clear coat it. And it doesn't make much of a difference here with no color lighting, but the clear coat gives it a nice, does that make the strength? Yeah, see, this strength actually makes a difference. So we're putting a clear coat over top of the metallic object. 25 is pretty good. Let's see what 10 looks like. Maybe a little less on the strength. How about 15? Let's do 15 as a base smooth, clear-coated skull. All right, very cool, very metal. So let's get rid of our sun, and let's just put that back to hidden. And now let's connect in our PSIRT into the, okay, first we need to pick our object here in our, right, what do we want to instantiate? We want to instantiate skulls from our generic list. Now they're all stacked on one another here by default. And I wonder why, did they pick up the metallic? They did, and they picked up the clear coat. Wonderful. You can tell here. Very good. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 skulls because we have 4 advisories. Okay? But we obviously don't want them stacked up on top of one another like this. That's no good. And if we render it, again, we have that metallic clear coat look. So, how do we move them around? Well, that's pretty simple. Okay, so we have 4 skulls instantiated from an original skull, and that number comes from the index of how many different arrays inside of our array we have. If there were 100 vulnerabilities, if there was 1 vulnerability, 7, whatever, we would have that many skulls. Right now they're all stacked up on each other. So let's change that and start to build and place our skulls in this 3D world. Again, full screen today. So what we need is a loop. Yeah, a loop. Just like a for loop or a while loop, we can make a loop. So Shift A, subprograms, loop. Wonderful. So we're going to have a loop. Well, what do we want to loop? Well, we want a new iterator here, and let's call this, well, I don't want to call it skull loop. We'll call it PSIRT loop. And we need a new iterator, which is an object list, because our skulls are objects. Okay, great. Well, now what do we do once we have a for loop? Well, we're going to invoke it, create an invoke node, and place it, say, over here. And now our objects, right, we see object list here, PSIRT loop. Our objects come from the skull. Okay, great. Well, now what do we need to do? Well, now we need to transform, right, transform the location of these skulls. So we're going to do Shift A, and we need a math node, an object transform node, excuse me, transform output, right? So an object transforms output node. Everybody follow so far? So now we want to plug our objects here, and let's change the objects here to say skulls. And we're going to plug the skulls into the object, right? Makes sense. We want to transform an object's output. So let's transform the skull's output. And let's put the XYZ on. And you can see that it's already adjusted their locations to 0 here. So I think what we need is a combine vector node. Let me just search for that. Or is it under vector here? Vector, combine vector node. And we're going to combine the vectors here. And where are we going to get them from? Well, we're going to see how index is blue here. Let's type blue into, hey, look at. So now the actual separation, the x value, is based on the vector of the index. Now that's not far enough apart, I don't think, right? We want to put text all around this thing, and we don't want it hovering on the x-axis like this. So let's go ahead and change that. And we're going to do Shift A with a math node, number math, and we're going to change it here to multiply, and you can see it's multiplied by 0. Let's multiply it by 25. And now look how far apart the skulls are. So let's just, and we can tinker with this at any time. For now, let's make it, 5 and keep them relatively close. All right, now that's the x-axis. I think we could even plug it into the y-axis, which will stagger them back like that. Probably don't want that. But what about the z-axis? Well, we stagger them up that way, right? I don't know that we want that based on the index. But let's just say, right, I don't mind them being straight along the x or lined up on the y, but let's get them up off the ground. So let's give this 25. That's too much. 5. Yeah, let's just put them up there. 5 for now. We have 4 floating skulls. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so that's how we can transform. And you can do what I just showed you any way you want. If you do want them staggered along different axes, that's great. And we're going to use this same principle as what you've seen here to place lights and to place text and to jazz this up with different information. We're going to put a logo. We're going to put a couple of logos. But so far, so good. Form, and if I render it and maybe put a sunlight in just to light it up, we have 4 shiny metallic skulls. Right on, right on. So what I'm going to do, it would take forever to record all of it. So I'm going to place some of the text using the techniques you've just seen. Once I have 1 or 2 going, I'll record another little video of how we can add text objects, iterate them, and not just place them, right? That's all we've had to do with the skull, is instantiate an object and place it. Well, with text, we actually have to plug the data in so it says what we want it to say. So I'll record that next, and then we're just going to keep building this 3D world together. Thanks for your time. Stay tuned.